We've all faked an illness before. Whether you needed more time to study for a test, or you were too hungover to make it to work, or you just wanted to get out of school to goof off for the day so you could crash your mate's dad's priceless Ferrari, I can guarantee that you have lied about being sick at least once to avoid trouble. But one thing that you might not have tried is faking someone else's illness. This approach to making life easier is very well documented through the absolutely heinous stuff that doctors used to do to women with hysteria, just so their husbands didn't have to put up with them. But all of that is in the past, right? I mean, after all, this is the ever so enlightened 21st century, where women are allowed to have thoughts and feelings, unfortunately. Of course, people aren't being lied to about fake medical conditions anymore. Well, it turns out that wanting a break from all of the nagging might not be the only reason why people in power make up fake illnesses. And there is one job in particular with a very high level of public scrutiny, where a single mistake can have fatal consequences. And sometimes a little excuse, a little get out of jail free card is needed for those that protect and serve a little too hard. And what better excuse than a mysterious illness that comes on suddenly and gives its victims almost superhuman strength, followed by instant death. Victorian fainting lady disease. But, as the cops like to call it, excited delirium. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get started, it is in fact your boy, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid has brought a true console level experience to portable gaming. Here you will conquer raids, dungeons, campaign battles and bosses. You will build up your champions along the way and take part in my personal favourite mode, the PvP arena. In addition, there are hundreds of artifacts and buffs with over 600 unique champions to choose from, so you can fight your battles whatever way you wish. And Raid has just released the legendary version of everybody's favourite champion, Death Knight. The Raid community has been waiting for this for a very long time, and Ultimate Death Knight is everything that they hoped for. Ultimate Death Knight has a solid kit that will help players progress through dungeons, the Doom Tower, the clan battles, or the Hydra boss. And here is a little message from the lesser version of the champion himself.
Hey everybody, Death Knight here to tell you about the Death Knight Hunt event. Raid's giving away Ultimate Death Knight, a champion that was supposed to be an upgraded version of me, but turns out is totally not. So he's just the new awesome legendary champion. So I guess just log in, play 7 times between now and October 27th, and Ultimate Death Knight is yours. Great, enjoy. Enter promo code DKRises for a ton of free items to instantly upgrade Ultimate Death Knight to level 50, 5-star Ascension, or whatever. I don't care. Back to you.
Also this month, Raid has just released a giant new feature, Awakening, and they've added yet another brutal dungeon for you to beat, the Iron Twins Fortress. So if you are good enough to take down the Iron Twins, then it will definitely be worth your while. Awakening your champion lets you choose a powerful blessing that can transform how they perform in battle. The blessings both look great and they add a massive amount of variety. This whole feature has given the game an entirely new level of depth and strategy. I've had a great time playing around with it and trying out different builds. So use my link down in the description box down below to download Raid for free on your phone or PC, and also use the code DCRISES for a bunch of free items to level your strongest champion up to level 50 5-star Ascension. This code is both for new and existing players. So if you want a starting boost in Raid Shadow Legends, then hit my link down below or scan the QR code on the screen to get unique bonuses worth $30. That is 200,000 silver, an XP booster, an energy refill, an ancient shard, and the epic champion Aina, so you can summon a great champion as soon as you get into the game. These rewards are only available to new players and only for the next 30 days, and you can find these rewards here in your inbox. The phenomenon that we now know as Excited Delirium was first noticed in the 1800s, and it was called Bell's Mania, after Dr. Luther Bell noticed a rare combination of manic symptoms and fever that didn't really fit with any other similar diseases. His discovery subsequently went by several names over the years, including agitated delirium, lethal catatonia, and acute exhausted mania, before excited delirium was eventually coined in 1985 by a forensic pathologist by the name of Charles Wheatley, in the wake of a study that he carried out in Miami-Dade County titled Cocaine-Induced Psychosis and Sudden Death in Recreational Cocaine Users, which linked, you guessed it, the sudden deaths of 7 cocaine users that had been forcibly restrained. Because what better place is there to study batshit insane cokeheads than Florida? Wheatley was convinced that crack was the cause of death, and he conducted a follow-up study to back up his findings, in which he connected the deaths of 32 women who were recreational cocaine users to the condition. But if we have known about excited delirium in some shape or form for almost 200 years, why did it only come to prominence in the 80s? Well, essentially, the 80s was when the mentally ill began to be deinstitutionalised, and stimulant drugs like cocaine and crack began to run rampant on the streets, especially crack. I mean, there was so much crack going around in the 80s. I mean, just out of nowhere, it just absolutely exploded all over the place. I wonder who was responsible for that. You should all probably Google it. So really, the coining of the term excited delirium sort of resulted from a sudden increase in cases to diagnose with it, as mentally ill people and drug users are the most susceptible to excited delirium due to their increased dopamine levels, which can cause many of the symptoms associated with the illness. However, there isn't really a solid consensus on exactly what those symptoms are. And don't worry, we'll get into that. But the most common warning signs of excited delirium tend to be aggression and violence, agitation and paranoia, greatly increased strength, and a pain tolerance bordering on the superhuman, alongside incoherent speech and behaviour, and also fever. People that are suffering from excited delirium get very, very hot. The onset of these symptoms is also very sudden, almost instant, which makes it look like the person just abruptly snaps. Now, I know that you all like visual aids in these kinds of videos, so you're not just looking at my face the entire time, because I know that can get very boring for a lot of you, and I understand I wouldn't want to look at my face for that long either. And there is footage of what excited delirium reportedly looks like, but I'm not going to show it. Not only would I probably get a strike because it's police brutality followed by a person immediately dying, but the videos are just very unpleasant. But a typical case of excited delirium tends to progress in stages, with the first stage being that the patient starts to appear delirious. They might be mumbling, talking a lot of nonsense, speaking in tongues, that type of stuff. They will appear disoriented and start acting out, often pacing around or wearing inappropriate clothing or being completely naked due to their fever, which would also be causing them to sweat profusely. However, the patient's behaviour isn't usually that tame for very long. The second stage occurs pretty much immediately after the first, when the patient starts to be a bit of a nuisance by yelling and screaming or starting to get violent, which usually leads to witnesses calling the police. And stage 3 is essentially the police intervention, where they restrain the patient not just for their own safety, but to prevent them from hurting themselves or others. However, as you would expect, this can be pretty difficult sometimes, especially with the enhanced strength of the patient, and the cops might resort to tasing or sedating the patient to get them under control. Now, that sounds bad, but because cops are very strangely involved in the majority of excited delirium cases, don't worry, we will get into that later, cops are actually given training regarding what to look for and how to act if they suspect that someone has excited delirium. So, taking such rough measures to get the patient under control is just fine. Don't worry, everything is done by the book here. We will get into the book as well later, but that brings us to the fourth stage, which is essentially getting medical help. It's pretty fucked that this is one of the later stages, but I digress. This is the point where the cops identify the patient's affliction as excited delirium, and they immediately call for an ambulance, at which point the paramedics take over. Unfortunately, we don't actually know how to treat excited delirium, at least with any absolute certainty, because around 3/4 of sufferers die before they even get to the hospital. You know, how convenient. The main cause of death is cardiac arrest, because the sufferer's heart is going so hard and fast due to the stress, the mania, and the toxins in their system that eventually it just gives out. And also, respiratory failure can occur if the patient hyperventilates, as their breaths are too shallow to take in enough oxygen. But if paramedics manage to get to the scene fast enough and find the patient alive, then they tend to sedate them. And they get their temperature down by spraying them with water, applying ice packs, using fans, and injecting saline. And most importantly, the paramedics try to calm the patient down by saying soothing words, dimming the lights, and generally just being very comforting to them. However, ambulances very often take a while to arrive at the scene, and unfortunately there is a lot that can go wrong in that time, especially when the patient is in such a manic state. Prolonged struggles while under police restraint often make the situation a lot more dangerous, as this can make the patient even more agitated, which causes them to hyperventilate even more. The struggle can also make the strain on the patient's heart even worse and increase their chances of cardiac arrest. For this reason, cops very often try to calm them down using sedatives, with ketamine being pretty popular for being fast and reliable. However, ketamine can also go in the exact opposite direction by intensifying elevated levels of adrenaline and killing the patient even faster. And, as you would expect, tasers don't really help either, because, surprise, surprise, a legion of experts believe that they can interfere with your heart's rhythm. Turns out being electrocuted is bad for your heart. Shocking, I know. But now that you get the gist of what excited delirium is and why it's reported to be so deadly, you may be noticing a few things that seem off. Like the complete lack of any attempt at de-escalation before going straight for the takedown. Well, that is because everything we have discussed so far, and excited delirium itself, might be a giant pile of bullshit. Excited delirium might not actually even be real. The medical community doesn't even recognise it, and it's not even listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, because, as the American Psychiatric Association put it, its definition is too non-specific. In fact, this vagueness actually leads many scientists to believe that excited delirium is actually a misdiagnosis of other conditions that it has a striking similarity to, especially stimulant psychosis and neuroleptic malignant syndrome, which share pretty much every aspect of excited delirium. Stimulant psychosis is caused by an overdose on a stimulant, which causes delusions, hallucinations, and aggression, while neuroleptic malignant syndrome is about as deadly as excited delirium, and it presents itself with a very high fever, rapid heart rate, and changes in mental state due to an adverse reaction to antipsychotic medication. Now, while stimulant abuse is known to cause aggression, super strength seems like a bit of a stretch, right? Well, to be fair, adrenaline and fight or flight is a hell of a drug. And it can enable you to deal with and shake off a fucking unholy amount of damage. Have you ever seen a woman turn into the Hulk because her baby was in trouble? Or have you watched videos of criminals that are so high on fuck knows what that it takes the whole mag to bring them down because they're just taking those 9mm rounds like they're fucking Nerf darts? Yeah, adrenaline is very fucking powerful. But that said, it makes Excited Delirium a very convenient excuse for justifying beating the shit out of someone or using your firearm on them. You know, Your Honour, he went into goblin mode, I was forced into a self-defense situation. And this is where the big controversy comes in. Because Excited Delirium comes up a fucking lot and reports about deaths in police custody. A disproportionate number of them being black men. Also, Excited Delirium never really appears by itself on death certificates, and it's almost always part of a long list of other possible causes of death, alongside police restraint and drug abuse. So it could maybe be possible that Excited Delirium isn't actually real. Cops are just trying to pretend it's real so they don't have to take any blame whenever someone dies in custody. Even when a coroner determines a single cause of death, Excited Delirium very often sneaks its way into the conversation in cases like these. Perhaps most infamously during the George Floyd incident, when one of the cops on the scene expressed concerns about Excited Delirium while, all that stuff was happening. It was even expected to come up during the trial after an autopsy report mentioned high blood pressure, coronary heart disease, and the presence of fentanyl and meth. However, even though the paramedic that was on the scene believes that Excited Delirium is real, he testified that he didn't see any of its signs in George Floyd. Now, say what you will about George Floyd, but he is far from the only case like this. Excited Delirium accounts for 3% of police interventions and 10% of deaths in custody. And the demographics of that morgue are pretty disproportionate to the general population. Despite the fact that the old Bolivian marching powder has a very diverse market, black men are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with Excited Delirium post-mortem than their white counterparts. A 2020 review into Excited Delirium also found that Wheatley's initial link of stimulant abuse and death was actually only secondary to police aggression, which the researchers determined to be the real cause of death in the overwhelming majority of cases. With all of that in mind, it's pretty clear why Excited Delirium is seen by many as a get-out-of-jail-free card for police brutality, with its infamously vague definition essentially providing the plausible deniability needed to obfuscate the cops' incompetence. In reality, sufferers that died while being restrained by the police were most likely suffocated with the resulting panic of being held in a deadly chokehold and desperately trying to stay alive and having their resistance to, not dying being misdiagnosed as Excited Delirium. Here's me thinking that it's totally normal for people to panic and freak out when they're being choked to death, Turns out they're just crazy. And that is why it is really fucking important to know your shit when you're in a job where you need to physically restrain someone, because you want to keep them just as safe as yourself and everyone around you, and also you need to understand that people do tend to freak out a bit when they think they are literally fucking dying. And the reason that I know about Excited Delirium is because I used to work in private security and I was actually specifically trained in it. We were shown body cam footage of police arrests of people who were showing all of the symptoms. They were half-clothed or naked, they were speaking in tongues and mumbling gibberish, they had the wild eyes, the pacing back and forth, and they were also showing extreme strength, to the point where in one of the videos, 5 police officers were struggling to take down just one guy. And in the training videos that we were shown, once the guy was in handcuffs, he would continue struggling and screaming for a few minutes and then, boom, dead. Just instant death. Just immediately goes limp, stops moving, no pulse, stone dead. And that is when you hear the police officers start to go, oh fuck, oh shit, and then they start removing the cuffs so they can do CPR, but by that point, it's too late. Now, very fortunately, I never came across anything like that when I was working in security. But one thing that I would like to point out is that in all of the body cam footage we were shown, the victim was on some kind of stimulant. And when you do private security in Scotland, you are going to be spending most of your time fighting with people who are full of cocaine. There have been far too many occasions where I've gone into the nightclub toilet on patrol and I hear a very familiar sounding coming from the stalls, so I open the stall to find 3 guys in there all doing lines. And then the toilet very quickly turns into a scene from a Guy Ritchie movie. Now, restraining someone can be difficult, especially if the guy's a lot stronger than you, or you're not trained correctly, or the guy actually knows how to fight. As a bouncer, there is nothing worse than coming up against someone that actually knows how to fight. Because the conflict resolution then takes longer, and I've got stuff to do, but I digress. Now, restraining someone who is full of cocaine and their fight or flight has kicked in, well, that is really fucking hard. Especially when you're trying to do it on the floor of a toilet that has been nice and lubed up with everyone's piss from the entire evening. So, I have had some crazy eyes, super strength, self-defense situations, but fortunately they calmed down once they were restrained. But in every single situation that I've been in that is kind of similar to Excited Delirium, the person was on drugs. Also, here is some very important advice from an ex-bouncer now that I'm remembering all the times where that has happened. If you get caught by the bouncers doing coke in a nightclub, just take it on the chin and let them throw you out. Because most likely, that's all that's going to happen. Most people panic because they think it's like they're being arrested and snitched on to the police, and cocaine possession does carry some pretty harsh sentences here, but as bouncers, we just want you out the club. All we're going to do is throw you out. We aren't going to call the police. And do you want to know why we don't call the police? Because then we are going to get called to your trial as a witness, which means a day that I'm not working and not getting paid. And given the amount of people that we throw out of nightclubs for doing coke, seriously, 9 out of every 10 people that I threw out was because I caught them doing coke, we would end up in court every single day. I don't have the time to go to your trial just for you to then not turn up and then it has to get rescheduled for another day. So I have to take another unpaid day off work. Right? I've no time, pal. But instead, what some absolute wee fannies like to do is they panic because they think they're going to get a criminal record or time in jail, or they just want to look tough in front of their friends, so they start fighting the bouncers. Now there has been an assault. So now we will restrain you, and now we will actually call the police. And not only will you now actually be getting charged with possession, because thanks to you, the police are involved now, but you also have a nice few assault charges on top of that as well. When all your stupid arse had to do was shut the fuck up, let us escort you outside, and then you and your friends could go try the next nightclub. You had the choice between a good evening or a bad 1 to 3 years, and your dumb arse chose the latter. So, if you get caught doing coke in the nightclub by the bouncers, just shut the fuck up and let them take you outside. Also, if you get caught in possession of cocaine, the cops go through your phone to find your dealer, and then they'll arrest him. And then your dealer might find out that he got arrested because you were a fucking idiot. Good luck with that. But anyway, that's a hell of a tangent. We were talking about Excited Delirium. Now, it's not just useless or power-tripping cops that benefit from the existence of Excited Delirium. It's also a massive benefit to the police industrial complex. You see, a lot of the awareness of Excited Delirium came from police training that is kindly provided by a company named Axon Network, which was formerly known as Taser International. That's right, much of the literature and knowledge of the condition that for some reason immediately kills people. You know, this mysterious medical condition that for some reason instantly kills people, usually after they've been tased. I can't understand why. Boggles the fucking mind. Was actually created by the company that make the fucking tasers. Since the turn of the century, Excited Delirium has been mentioned in more than 276 deaths in the wake of tasers being used, and it's been mentioned in around a quarter of lawsuits against the company. Whetley, the very pathologist that coined the term, was even an expert witness in over a dozen of these lawsuits, insisting that tasers have never caused someone to go into cardiac arrest, and it's always excited delirium that causes the fatal strain on the patient's heart. Taser even had a protege of Whetley's on the payroll, whose expert testimony in 8 lawsuits between 2005 and 2009 was worth about $24,000 to the company. In one case, this protege even examined brain tissue of one individual who had died after being tased, and her conclusion was that the brain tissue contained signs of excited delirium, whatever the fuck that means, and that was actually included as part of the investigation. And if that isn't bad enough, the investigators didn't even know that this expert witness was in Taser's pocket. Ultimately, fortunately, it was ruled that the victim had died of cardiac arrest due to being tased. But the fact that one of Taser's appointed own experts was part of the investigation into their products is scummy as fuck. But that's what they do. They actively seek out news of deaths involving tasers, and then they jump right into action, pulling off Saul Goodman-esque shenanigans to cover it up when the inevitable lawsuits start coming in, by flooding the courtrooms with their own experts and sponsoring police training on just a bunch of medical hoo-ha bullshit. And if none of that is enough to convince you that this shit is absolutely fucked, there is one last tidbit that I've saved for last. You know that follow-up study with the 32 coke-addled prostitutes that proved Whetley's theory? Yeah, it turns out that they were all most likely murdered by a serial killer. Whetley somehow, so strange, somehow didn't notice that the women had been strangled to death. Which you think might have been mentioned once or twice on the autopsy. Police brutality is such a massive problem because, as an arm of the state, they are almost completely unaccountable for their actions. The thin blue line is so strong that when actual dirty cops go down, it's not justice, it's just more or less a calculated sacrifice to appease the mob. They will do anything to cover their arses, which, as we've just discussed, includes making up medicalised hoo-ha bullshit to excuse their barbaric abuses of power. Allow me to be that uncle at the Christmas dinner table and say, they're not all bad, I'm sure there's some good ones in there, but you know what they're fucking like, they're not all bad. Some cops are good. However, cops in general are not your friends. And the only thing you can trust them with is shooting your fucking dog.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody subscribe.